Most women shatter when their marriage ends. They scream, they throw vases, they burn wedding photos in kitchen sinks at 2 a.m. They demand answers from men who no longer have the decency to look them in the eye. Nyla Rowan did none of that. She didn't cry when she saw the messages on Adrian Hale's phone. She didn't shake when she watched the videos he thought he'd deleted. The hotel bed, the champagne, the junior analyst from his firm giggling into his neck. She just checked the time. Because what her husband didn't know, what no one in the glass towers of London knew, was that she wasn't leaving because her heart was broken. She was leaving because her cover had just been activated. The black SUV waiting 2 streets over was not an Uber. It was an extraction vehicle. And the man she was going to meet tonight wasn't a rebound. He was the most dangerous billionaire in the Mediterranean. The silence in the penthouse felt heavier than the rain hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows. London was a blurred smear of lights beyond the glass, a city moving too fast to care that one marriage was quietly dying 40 stories up. The apartment itself was as cold as a showroom. Chrome, glass, marble, a space built to impress Adrian's fellow partners at the investment bank, not to be lived in. Nyla folded a silk blouse with the same crisp, economical movements she'd once used to disassemble a handgun. Left over right, smooth the fabric, square the corners. She placed it into the open Remova suitcase. The soft hiss of silk against lining was the only sound in the bedroom. Rain fabric, her steady breathing. "You're being ridiculous," Adrian said from the doorway. He leaned against the frame like he owned it, a crystal tumbler of 12-year scotch swirling in his hand. He looked tired, but beneath the fatigue was the familiar arrogance, the belief that everything, including her, would eventually bend back to his will. "It was one night," he said, tone dismissive. "One stupid mistake. You're really going to throw away 11 years over that?" Nyla didn't answer. She reached for the jewelry box on her dresser and flipped the lid. Diamonds glittered back at her under the recessed lights. Tennis bracelets, chandelier earrings, the gilt gifts of a man who thought problems could be solved with receipts. Her fingers slid past all of them and closed around a small, cheap silver locket. The metal was slightly dull, the chain a little kinked. It was the only thing she owned from before Adrian Hale, before London, before the penthouse. "Where are you even going?" he pressed, the first thread of frustration creeping into his voice. "You have no savings, Nyla." "Not really. I control the accounts. The prenup locks you out of everything until this is finalized." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "You'll be begging to come back in a week." She fastened the locket around her neck and finally looked at him. His eyes were pale blue, the kind women once told her they got lost in at work parties. Tonight, staring into them, she felt nothing at all. "The keys are on the counter," she said quietly. "The building will need them." Adrian's jaw clenched. He pushed off the doorframe, the charm dropping from his face like a mask he was tired of wearing. "If you walk out," he said, voice low and sharp, "I'm canceling the cards. I'm killing your phone plan. You'll have nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." The zipper of the suitcase screamed open in the stillness. It sounded to Nyla like a body bag closing. She snapped the suitcase shut, slid the telescoping handle out, and smoothed her beige trench coat with unhurried hands. Her reflection in the mirrored wardrobe was calm, controlled. A woman who'd already mourned this marriage years ago. She stepped toward the door. Adrian grabbed her arm. For a moment, the old Nyla, Adrian's Nyla, almost reacted, almost winced. Instead, she simply looked down at his hand on her skin. No words, just a flat, assessing stare. It was astonishing how fast fear could move through a man like him. He let go. "You'll be back," he muttered. It sounded less like a threat and more like a prayer. She walked down the corridor, the wheels of the suitcase whispering over polished wood, and pressed the elevator button. When the doors opened, she stepped inside without looking back. They slid shut on the image of Adrian standing barefoot in the hallway, scotch in one hand, phone in the other, staring at the closed doors like a man who had just realized the stranger in his house all these years had been his wife. The moment Nyla stepped out into the lobby and the scent of wet concrete and car exhaust hit her, the persona dropped. She didn't slump. She sharpened. Her shoulders came back a fraction. Her gaze narrowed. The emotional static of the bedroom fell away, replaced by a clear, tactical calm. She walked out into the drizzle of Kensington High Street and turned left instead of right. Away from the rank of taxis Adrian assumed she'd take. Away from the CCTV angles she knew the building used to monitor residents. 2 blocks down, a black Mercedes S-Class idled by the curb, headlights cutting through the rain. Nyla reached into the lining of her tote and pulled out a slim, black burner phone, one she'd been carrying for 3 years, waiting for a call that had never come, until she made it. She dialed the only number stored in it. One ring, then a voice, distorted, male, low. Status. Asset is clear, Neela said, her heels clicking briskly on the pavement. Domestic cover compromised. No suspicion on secondary objective. Good. No warmth, no condolence. Your flight leaves from Biggin Hill in 40 minutes. Do you have the ledger? She petted the inside of her trench coat. In the hidden inner pocket, snug against her ribs, a small encrypted drive rested in a stitched-in pouch. It contained the real reason she'd married Adrian Hale. Not his heart, his access. Spreadsheets, offshore accounts, shell companies tying his bank to a discreet money laundering pipeline for a Eurasian crime syndicate that liked to pretend it didn't exist. 11 years of silent surveillance, of playing the docile wife while quietly copying files and photographing contracts. So much for being nothing without him, she thought. Yes, she said into the phone, I have it. Then the husband is no longer your concern, the voice replied. From this moment, you are off the grid. New brief will be delivered en route. The call disconnected. The Mercedes back door swung open from the inside as she approached. Warm leather and cologne spilled into the damp night. But the man inside wasn't the handler she was expecting. He was older than she remembered, maybe early 60s now, hair silver and perfectly barbered. Dark suit sitting on him like it had been cut on his bones. The last time she'd seen him was across a marble ballroom in Vienna, under chandeliers and strings playing something expensive. Ms. Rowan, he said, mouth tipping into a smile that never reached his eyes. Or is it time we drop that name? Rowan still works, Mr. Ward, Nyla replied, sliding into the seat beside him. Cassian Ward, the invisible man behind corporate implosions that made headlines without ever mentioning his name. The architect of unsolvable financial crimes that toppled dynasties. The man who had recruited her at 22 out of a forensic accounting conference in Brussels and turned her into a ghost. The door thumped shut. The car slid away from the curb, the city blurring past. Show me, Cassian said. Nyla removed the encrypted drive from her coat and placed it in his palm. He plugged it into a waiting laptop, fingers moving over the keys with surgical efficiency. Columns of numbers, charts, and transaction trails lit up the screen. Cassian's eyes flicked over them, cold and precise. Adrian Hale, he said at last. A small, tedious man with very expensive friends. Small fish, Neela agreed. A test, Cassian corrected. For you. He snapped the laptop closed and leaned back, studying her face as though she were another asset to be evaluated. You stayed buried for 11 years, and he said, smiled through anniversaries, hosted dinners for people you should have strangled with napkins. Let everyone assume you were stupid and dependent. That requires discipline. I want what you promised me, Neela said. Cassian's gaze sharpened. There it was, the real Nyla, the one he'd seen in Brussels. A woman who could trace a money trail through 7 jurisdictions and never once raise her voice. And you'll have it, he said. But the contract has evolved. He pressed a button on the center console. A smoked glass partition slid up between them and the driver, sealing them into a cocoon of leather and muted engine noise. We no longer just need you to disappear, Cassian went on. We need you to surface somewhere else, somewhere more dangerous than a banker's penthouse. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a glossy photograph, passing it to her. A yacht stared back at her. It was impossible. A floating city of black steel and reflected sky, 3 decks high, brutal and beautiful. The kind of vessel magazines pretended belonged to anonymous investors, when everyone knew exactly which names they weren't allowed to print. The Eternum, Cassian said. 295 feet, helipad, submersible garage, security systems that make small nations nervous. Who owns it? Nyla asked, though she already knew the answer. Leonidas Drakos, Cassian said. Greek-born, naturalized elsewhere, depending on which passport he's holding that day. Tech magnate, private military contractor, discreet weapons dealer, though you'll never prove that on paper. A tremor of something that was not fear exactly, but close enough to taste, flickered at the edge of Nyla's control. And you want me to, what? She asked. Stage an audit in the middle of the Mediterranean? I want you to take a job, Cassian said smoothly. Dracos just lost the curator of his private art collection in a tragic and entirely suspicious accident off the Amalfi coast. He tapped the photograph. He is currently docked in Monaco for the Grand Prix and interviewing replacements. You're not going to apply for the position, Ms. Rowan. He smiled. You're already hired. Nyla looked at him. What exactly is on that yacht, Cassian? He slid a slim brown folder across her lap. Inside was a single sheet in a grainy photo of a cylindrical device, black and matte, the size of a small duffel bag. In the vault 2 decks below the waterline, Cassian said softly, our sources believe Dracos is storing a prototype micro-EMP. One pulse knocks out an entire city's infrastructure. No lights, no cameras, no digital evidence. He plans to sell it to a client whose name you don't want to know. He shrugged as if discussing the weather. You will embed as his curator, confirm the device's presence, and retrieve the data we need from the vault. Schematics, serial numbers, proof. And if I can get more than proof? Nyla asked, eyes on the photograph. Cassian's smile barely moved. Then you get your new identity, your passport, and $5 million wired to whatever quiet little life you choose. Vineyard, bookshop, beach bar in some country that doesn't extradite. You walk away clean. And if I fail, she asked, then you die in a tragic accident at sea. Cassian's voice remained perfectly even, which conveniently you are already on the verge of doing in your personal life. Either way, Mrs. Hale disappears. He watched her, giving her just enough space to believe she still had a choice. Nyla looked at the photo of the Eternum. It looked less like a yacht and more like a shark waiting at the surface. All sleek menace and hidden teeth. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. When do I start? She asked. Cassian raised his glass of champagne from the console's holder and handed it to her. The moment you step onto the helipad in Nice, he said. Welcome to the high life, Nyla. The helicopter ride from Nice to Monaco took exactly 7 minutes. From above, the Côte d'Azur looked like something airbrushed. Slabs of white villas, threads of winding roads, water so blue it bordered on obscene. Nyla watched it through the tinted window, headset muffling the rotor's thunder. From this height, everything looked clean, simple, perfect. It never was. She had been repackaged for this new role. Gone were the practical sweaters and understated dresses of a banker's wife. Now she wore a cream-colored linen suit that had been tailored to her overnight in London, oversized sunglasses, and a silk scarf that could have paid her old rent for 3 months. On paper, she was now Nyla Rowan, specialist in Renaissance and Baroque art, formerly attached to discreet private collections in Florence, Zurich, and Dubai. Her new resume was a carefully woven tapestry of truths and lies. Enough verifiable detail to pass casual checks. Enough missing to keep real background searches chasing their own tails. The chopper dropped toward Port Hercule, Monaco's harbor curving like a jeweled crescent below. Yachts jostled for space, each more arrogant than the last. White hulls, glass decks, money disguised as fiberglass. And then she saw it. The Eternum. Photographs had not done it justice. It sat apart from the others, a vast blade of midnight blue steel and mirror glass rising from the water. 2 helipads, a swimming pool that seemed to hang off the aft deck in a sheet of liquid light. Radar domes and antenna arrays that looked, to Nyla's trained eye, a little too sophisticated for just navigation. It wasn't a boat. It was a sovereign territory. The helicopter settled onto the quay's pad. A tender was already waiting below, a sleek silver bullet of a boat with a stylized A burned into its side. As she descended the metal steps, a crew member stepped forward to help her aboard. He was young, tanned, in a charcoal polo and white shorts, a comms earpiece tucked discreetly behind his ear. Ms. Rowan, he asked, accent lightly French. Mr. Dracos is expecting you. Of course he was. The tender shot across the harbor, slicing through the water. Wind tore at Nyla's scarf. The Eternum grew larger and larger, blocking out the view of the town behind it. They approached the stern, where the yacht's beach club opened directly onto the sea. Wide teak decking, low white lounges, a bar that looked better stocked than most hotel lobbies. As the tender eased into position and the hydraulic platform lowered, Nyla stood, smoothed her suit, and stepped onto the deck. The title of her new life, she thought, writing itself in the back of her mind. She packed her bags without tears, and now she was standing on a billionaire's mega yacht with no way back to shore. Waiting for her was not Leonidas Dracos. It was a woman who looked like she'd been carved out of ice. Tall, impossibly straight-backed, with pale hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her skin. She wore a navy sheath dress, bare feet, and held a tablet in one hand like a weapon. "Ms. Rowan," she said, her accent sharp, Germanic. "I am Ingrid Weiss, Chief of Staff. Shoes off, please. We do not bring the street onto this deck." The tone made it clear this was not a request. Nyla slipped off her heels without protest, feeling the warmth of the teak under her bare soles. "A pleasure, Ms. Weiss," she said evenly. "Mr. Dracos values punctuality," Ingrid went on, eyes never quite meeting Nyla's as they skimmed the tablet. "You are 3 minutes early. This is acceptable." She turned on her heel. "Follow me. Do not speak to crew unless necessary. Do not enter the bridge, the engine room, or the owner's deck without invitation. Do not attempt to access secured areas. Do not use recording devices. If you are found with unauthorized electronics, you will be removed from the vessel immediately." Her lips twitched, the ghost of a smile that wasn't one. "We are currently 12 nautical miles offshore most nights. The swim is discouraging." They entered a glass elevator, the sea dropping away below their feet as it rose. The interior design hit Nyla like a physical force. Someone had spent an obscene amount of money to make this place look effortlessly minimalist. Pale stone floors, walls paneled in silk and brushed metal, the hum of hidden air systems keeping everything at exactly the right temperature. And everywhere, art. A charcoal study that looked suspiciously like an early Picasso hung next to a narrow corridor. On a side table sat a small bronze that might have been a Giacometti. No labels, no alarms visibly attached. You didn't need them when the entire ship was a sensor. They stopped at the top deck. "Mr. Dracos is in the Sky Lounge," Ingrid said. "He does not tolerate small talk. Be concise." The elevator doors slid open. The Sky Lounge was 20 meters of glass in every direction. Monaco glimmered outside like someone's jewelry spilled along the coast. The sea was a sheet of dark silk. In the center of the room, on a black velvet sofa, sat Leonidas Dracos. He was younger than the dossier suggested. Late 30s, maybe. Dark hair trimmed close at the sides, beard just enough to take the edge off a jaw that photographers would murder to shoot. He wore a white linen shirt open at the throat, sleeves rolled to his forearms, revealing a geometric tattoo that curled up from his wrist and vanished under his cuff. On that same wrist, a platinum watch no sensible person would wear at sea. He folded the physical newspaper in his hands, an affectation in the digital age, and set it aside as he stood. "Ms. Rowan," he said. His voice was smooth, almost lazy, but underneath was the cold ring of tempered steel. He didn't offer his hand. "The woman who caught the forged Botticelli in the Geneva collection 3 years ago," he added. Nyla's muscles tightened. That incident was supposed to be buried. The Geneva collection job had been quiet, handled off books. The only people who knew about it were Cassian's team and a handful of very angry men in very expensive suits. "That detail isn't on my resume," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "Someone did their homework." "It wasn't hard," Leonidas said. "Men who lose 40 million on a fake painting tend to complain." He nodded toward a covered easel in the corner. "I didn't bring you here just to catalog my collection, Ms. Rowan. A computer can do that. I brought you because I have a problem." He walked to the easel and took hold of the linen cover. "This is your audition." He pulled the cloth away. Nyla's breath stalled. The painting beneath was a woman standing before a mirror. In the reflection, her face was not her own. It was a skull, teeth bared in a parody of a smile. The brushwork was luminous and cruel, the colors subtle and knowing. It was also supposed to be missing. "La Santa de Cádiz," Nyla murmured before she could stop herself. "Stolen from the Garcia estate in '92. Leonidas' gaze sharpened. "So you recognize it?" "If it's real," she said, forcing her heartbeat back under control. "Half of Interpol would like a word with whoever owns it." He smiled, just a fraction. "I paid 42 million for it," he said. "But there are rumors that I was robbed, that some talented insect switched it with a copy along the way. I want you to tell me if I've been made a fool of." He stepped back. "Understand something, Ms. Rowan," he added quietly. "If you lie to me, I will know. And people who lie to me in this room don't get a second chance." In the corner of her vision, Nyla saw Ingrid standing by the elevator. Motionless, eyes on her tablet but attention clearly on them. Somewhere inside the walls, cameras were watching, microphones listening. This was the first test. Nyla stepped closer to the painting. She caught the faint scent of aged varnish, old wood, and something else. Ozone from the climate control. "May I?" she asked. Leonidas nodded toward a low table where a jeweler's loupe and a small UV torch waited, already set out. She worked in silence. Layer by layer, she built a picture. The crackler pattern, fine and irregular, not the artificial spiderweb that came from heat aging. Pigments under UV. The canvas weave. Even the hand-hewn frame, its joints and nails. 10 minutes. Her pulse ticked in her throat like a clock. Behind her there was only the soft rustle of Leonidas shifting his weight, the almost inaudible tap of his ring against his watch. "Well?" he asked finally. Nyla straightened, setting the loop down. "It's a masterpiece," she said. "The varnish fluoresces correctly under UV. The pigment layering is consistent with late 17th century Spanish work. The aging is organic, not forced." Leonidas' shoulders loosened a fraction. "But," she added, "the temperature in the room seemed to drop 3 degrees. But it isn't the original Santa de Cadas." His eyes narrowed. "Explain." "It's a contemporary copy," Nyla said calmly. "An exceptional one, likely done within the last 5 to 10 years. I'd bet on an artist with access to the original for a brief period and enough technical knowledge to reverse engineer the materials." She stepped closer, pointing to a delicate highlight at the edge of the skull's teeth. "Here," she said. "The white used for this highlight is titanium-based. Titanium white wasn't commercially available until the early 20th century. The original would have used lead white." Silence. Leonidas looked at the painting for a long moment. Then he laughed once, a short, humorless sound that made the hairs on the back of Nyla's neck stand up. He picked up a phone from a nearby console, dialed without looking, and lifted it to his ear. "It's a fake," he said, eyes never leaving Nyla's face. "Deal with him." He hung up. Somewhere, someone's fate had just been sealed because of her words. "You just saved me from hanging a very expensive embarrassment on my wall," Leonidas said slowly. "And you condemned a very talented thief." He tilted his head, studying her. "How does that feel, Ms. Rowan?" Nyla held his gaze. "It feels," she said, "like I just did my job." For the first time, he looked at her with something other than polite assessment. Interest. "Welcome aboard the Eternum, Ms. Rowan," Leonidas said. "Ingrid will show you to your suite. Dinner is at 8. Black tie. We're expecting guests." He started to turn away, then glanced back over his shoulder. "And Nyla?" "Yes, Mr. Dracos?" "Don't ever lie to me," he said softly. "Everyone else on this ship does. I'd like to keep at least one person who doesn't." The elevator doors slid shut in front of her, cutting off the view of the Sky Lounge, the stolen painting, and the man who could very easily be the end of her. Her new life had officially begun, and somewhere below, deep in the hull of the Eternum, in a vault sealed behind steel and seawater, a weapon waited that could turn entire cities dark. Nyla intended to find it. Nyla's suite was larger than the entire flat she'd shared with Adrian in their first year of marriage. It had a king-sized bed angled toward a wall of glass that opened onto a private balcony, an ensuite bathroom of pale stone and chrome, a seating area with low sofas and coffee table books that had never been cracked open. Everything smelled faintly of salt, expensive detergent, and something sterile that spoke of filtered air and money. She spent exactly 8 seconds appreciating it. Then she went to work. The moment the door clicked shut behind Ingrid, Neela dropped her suitcase, crossed to the smoke detector, and twisted the casing open. The tiny audio transmitter nested beside the sensor was almost elegant. She left it in place. In the lamp base beside the bed, she found a second bug. In the digital clock by the bedside, a pinhole camera. She didn't touch any of them. Knocking out surveillance would be the fastest way to tell whoever ran security that their new curator was not just a woman with a good eye for art. Instead, she walked calmly into the bathroom, turned the shower on full hot, and closed the glass door behind her. Steam began to billow almost immediately, fogging the mirror, filling the room with a steady roar of water. Only then did she sit down on the closed toilet lid, pull her burner phone from the lining of her new handbag, and type. Arrived. Target confirmed. Owner volatile, hyper-observant, vault likely below waterline. Need schematics plus access protocols ASAP. Also, who else knows about EMP? She hit send. The outgoing message entry spun once, twice, then resolved to delivered. No reply. She waited 30 seconds longer than was comfortable. Still nothing. That was Cassian all over. Give meticulous briefings, pull strings in half a dozen countries to get you in place, then vanish right when you wanted a voice in your ear. She slid the phone back into the hidden pocket, stripped, and actually showered. partly to make the water usage look legitimate, partly because 11 hours of travel and one surgically calm walkout from her old life were starting to weigh on her. When she emerged, hair twisted up into a towel, the wardrobe had been filled while she was in the steam. It shouldn't have been possible. Silk gowns, tailored trousers, crisp shirts, shoes in her size, lined up with military precision along the floor. Jewelry trays in the drawer that glittered with pieces she definitely hadn't brought aboard. She ran a fingertip over an emerald pendant, wondering whether this was Ingrid's doing or Leonidas's idea of hospitality. The fact that both possibilities felt equally unsettling told her everything she needed to know. At 7:52 p.m., and wearing a dark green silk gown that hugged her like a whispered threat and a pair of heels that turned her walk into a dangerous glide, Neela stepped into the corridor. The cameras in the ceiling domes followed her. Of course they did. The dining room was on the upper aft deck, a long space lined with glass on three sides, the horizon a dark line beyond the soft golden light. A single table stretched down the center, set for six. Crystal, silver, porcelain so thin it almost glowed. Leonidas was already there. He stood with his back to the windows, tuxedo crisp, bow tie undone around his collar like he'd put it on to be polite, and then remembered he didn't have to try that hard. He was pouring something pale and expensive looking into fluted glasses. "You clean up well, Ms. Rowan," he said as she approached. Neela accepted the glass he offered, careful not to let her fingers brush his. "I've had practice," she replied. "We all practice something," a new voice said behind her. Nyla turned. Two men walked in, followed closely by Ingrid with her tablet. The first was large in the way of men who expected rooms to move around them. Broad shoulders, heavy jaw, thinning blonde hair slicked back from a sun-reddened forehead. His tuxedo looked a fraction too tight across his stomach, like he'd refused to acknowledge he needed a bigger size. "Victor Malin," Leonidas said. "Energy, mining, and making governments nervous." Malin grinned, teeth very white against skin tanned too fast. "And this," Leonidas continued, "is Jude Mercer." The second man was not physically imposing. Mid-30s, lean, dark hair combed neatly, suit so precise it almost vanished into itself. But his eyes, calm, pale, and faintly amused, took everything in at once. "A pleasure," Jude said, extending a hand to Nyla. His grip was cool and dry, his posture too balanced, his movements too economical. Not a typical billionaire hanger-on. "Mr. Mercer is a consultant," Leonidas said, as if that explained anything. "He helps clean up messes before they become news. Or after," Jude added lightly. "Depends how much someone is willing to pay." His gaze lingered on Nyla's face for half a heartbeat longer than was polite. His pupils tightened almost imperceptibly. "He knows my face," Nyla thought, or at least he's seen a version of it in a file. She tilted her head slightly and smiled as if she'd noticed nothing. "Shall we?" Leonidas asked. Dinner was exquisite and exhausting. They ate lobster in saffron foam and lamb that melted under a fork, served by silent staff who appeared and disappeared with the timing of a military operation. The conversation ranged from oil futures to sanctions policy to the absurdity of a particular tech CEO's latest interview. Nyla played her role. She spoke when spoken to, offered observations about the art market that were just astute enough to justify her presence, and pretended not to feel Jude Mercer's attention flickering back to her every few minutes. "So, Ms. Rowan," he said at last between courses, slicing a piece of lamb with surgical precision. "Where did you study?" "Florence," Nyla lied smoothly. "A small institute that does restoration work for private collections." "Ah," Jude said. "The one near the Arno, or the one that insists it isn't near the Arno?" "The second one," Neela replied without missing a beat. "The director would have a heart attack if you suggested she was anywhere near tourist traffic." Leonidas chuckled, clearly enjoying the sparring. "And before Florence?" Jude asked, tone casual. "Zurich," she said. "Numbers are the same everywhere." "Zurich is more interested in numbers than most places," Jude said. "I did some time there myself. Different kind of restoration work." "Jude has a background in law," Leonidas supplied. "Or at least that's what he tells people." "Law is just weaponized paperwork," Jude said lightly. "I prefer the part where you decide who gets to walk away." His eyes met Nyla's over his wine glass. The line was delivered as a joke. The message underneath was not. He knew. He might not know exactly who she was or who she worked for, but he could smell the training on her. The posture that never quite slouched, the way she scanned the room between sips of wine, the fact that she hadn't once checked her phone all evening. He was suspicious of everyone, Nyla reminded herself. Men like Jude Mercer didn't survive otherwise. "Tell me, Ms. Rowan," Victor Malin boomed from further down the table, rescuing the moment. "Do you find modern art weak?" He said modern art like it offended him personally. "I find it honest," Nyla replied, turning toward him, letting Jude's gaze slide off her for now. "When it's good." She launched into a story about an installation piece in Berlin, about a painting that had been slashed as a protest and then sold for more money after the damage. Malin laughed, offended and intrigued at once. She let the conversation swell around that, tuned her reactions, played the part. It was later, when the plates were cleared and Leonidas stood with his glass, that the next move came. "Our gentlemen have business," he said. "Ms. Rowan, you're free for the evening. Tomorrow Ingrid will give you access to the storage decks." "Some storage decks," Ingrid corrected, not looking up from her tablet. Leonidas ignored her. "Before you go," he added, directing his next words at Nyla, "walk with me." On the open aft deck, the night air was warm and smelled faintly of salt and jet fuel. The sea was a dark, heaving plain below. Nyla wrapped her arms lightly around herself as Leonidas stepped up beside her at the railing. "Jude doesn't like you," he said conversationally. "He doesn't know me," Nyla replied. "Exactly," Leonidas said, "and men like Jude hate it when they can't place someone." He turned his head, eyes searching her profile. "He thinks you're a plant." "I'm a curator," Nyla said, meeting his gaze. "You hired me to tell you when you've overpaid for stolen masterpieces." "You did that," he said, impressively. "But people are rarely just what they say they are on this boat." There was a beat of silence. "I have a job for you," Leonidas said finally. "The inventory isn't finished," she said. "I've only seen 2 decks." "Not about the art," he replied. "Not directly." He gestured toward the lounge where Victor Malin's large silhouette moved past the glass. "Malin has something I want," Leonidas said. "He's been stringing me along for months over a set of lithium rights in Siberia. He thinks he's clever. He's not." "And you want me to?" Nyla prompted. "Get his leverage," Leonidas said. "He wears a ring. Heavy gold, family crest. Inside there are coordinates engraved. The location of a buried storage site he hasn't disclosed to anyone else. He promised them to me, then tried to shop them to another buyer." "You want me to steal a ring off a man's finger?" Nyla said. "Borrow it," Leonidas corrected softly. "Photograph the inscription. Return it. No one needs to know, and I get what I paid for. I'm a curator, not a pickpocket. You're a woman who spotted a fake painting in 10 minutes that fooled experts for years," Leonidas said. "You registered every camera in this room when you walked in. You noticed Jude testing you before he finished his first question. Don't insult me by pretending all you do is catalog canvases." He took a step closer, invading her space without touching her. "Do this, and I double your fee," he murmured. "Refuse, and Jude's suspicions might start to sound reasonable." His breath was warm against her ear. The threat in his tone was ice cold. Nyla looked out at the water. This was not in Cassian's brief. She was here for the vault, for the EMP. Not to run side hustles for Leonidas's business grudges, but refusing would paint a target on her back before she'd even found the right door. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll need 15 minutes alone with him and a drink strong enough to make him feel invincible." Leonidas's mouth curved. "You'll have 20, he said, "and I'll make sure the bar pours generously." The game had just changed. Again. She went back inside. Victor Malin was in the cigar lounge, holding court with a cohiba between his fingers and a glass of cognac in the other, telling a story about a bear hunt that sounded like a lie even before he got to the part with the helicopter. Jude sat nearby, brows raised, amusement edged with something more calculating. Nyla approached the bar, asked for water, and let the smoke and noise wash around her. Malin noticed her within 30 seconds. Predators always did. "Ms. Rowan," he called, patting the leather seat beside him. "You're not joining us for a drink? Draco's brings someone interesting aboard and then wants to hide her away. Typical. I don't want to intrude on masculine pursuits, Nyla said, letting the faintest smile touch her mouth. I'm afraid my idea of excitement is arguing over whether a cracked varnish layer was intentional or neglect. Malene roared with laughter. Nonsense, he said. You must teach me about these things. Sit. Have a proper drink. None of this water. She hesitated just long enough to appear shy, then accepted the seat. Let him pour her a small amount of something amber and lethal. She did not drink it. Instead, she talked. Not about herself, about art, about how a ring could become more than jewelry in a portrait, how it could signal lineage, allegiance, ownership. She let her gaze drift to Malin's hand, to the heavy gold signet ring with its crest. A piece like that, she said, making her voice softer, more reverent, means more than any painting. You appreciate such things? Malin asked, raising his hand, letting the ring catch the light. She leaned in, allowing the neckline of her gown to do some of the work. It's extraordinary, she murmured. May I see? Malin hesitated, suspicion and ego wrestling in his eyes. Then he smiled, puffed up by the attention, and slid the ring from his finger. He placed it in her palm. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The engraving inside was tiny, barely visible without aid, numbers and letters etched with obsessive care. She turned the ring as if admiring the crest, her thumb brushing inside the band. Her other hand moved lightly to her side, slipping into the hidden pocket in her gown, where the burner phone waited, camera already open. She angled her hand just so, letting the phone's lens peek between two fingers for less than a second. 3 silent shots. It was a trick she'd practiced in mirror after mirror, on subway trains, at crowded gallery openings, a sleight of hand done with pixels instead of playing cards. The workmanship is beautiful, she said, returning the ring. You must never lose that. I don't intend to, Malin said smugly, slipping it back on. My grandfather wore it when he signed the first drilling contract with the state. It is a symbol, a promise. I'm sure, Nyla said, rising. Leaving so soon? He protested. The smoke, she said, touching her temple. I'm not as strong as you. She felt Jude's gaze following her as she walked out. In her cabin, with the shower blasting again, she sent the photos to Cassian along with a single line. You owe me. This time the reply was instant, already collecting. She stared at the words on the screen, the casual assumption that everything she did was his to use. Then she deleted the thread, the app and the images, leaving only the faint ghost of the pixels in a server, somewhere between here and a country that had never heard of her. The next morning, the atmosphere on the Eternum had shifted. Victor Malene was gone, tendered ashore before dawn, according to a passing crew member's conversation. Leonidas was in a good mood, pacing the aft deck with a phone in his hand, his voice low and satisfied. We moved overnight, he told Nyla when she inevitably crossed his path. Malin will arrive in Novosibirsk to find his little secret already, nationalized. You took the site, she said. I took back what he promised and tried to sell twice, Leonidas corrected, sipping his coffee. You helped. Payment sent. For the record, Nyla said, you owe me nothing. You pay me. That's it. Leonidas's gaze slid to her. That's a very tidy way of looking at it, he said. But life out here, it's not tidy. He let the words hang. You wanted to see the storage decks, he said finally, nodding toward Ingrid, who appeared as if summoned. Ingrid will take you, not the vault. Not yet. Earn it. Understood, Nyla said. She followed Ingrid down into the yacht's bowels, through corridors that grew narrower, more functional, the air cooler and humming with machinery. She cataloged crates of sculptures, racks of canvases in climate-controlled cabinets, shelves of manuscripts in boxes acid-free and labeled in a meticulous hand. She asked about humidity controls, about insurance records, about emergency protocols for flooding. Ingrid answered what she could, shut down what she wouldn't. No one goes to C deck without Mr. Dracos's express order, the chief of staff said at last when Nyla's questions edged too close. Not even me. That must be inconvenient, Neela observed. On the contrary, Ingrid said, it keeps life simple. That night in her cabin, Nyla pulled a second device from the heel of one of her shoes, A minuscule, encrypted drive no one but her knew about. Not Cassian, not the program administrators, no one. She started a file. Leonidas Dracos. Assets, habits, patterns. The way his temper flared and cooled, the things that made his eyes sharpen, the little tells when he lied. Victor Malin's ring, the coordinates. The sudden change in mood this morning, and the fact that the Eternum's course had shifted slightly north. If Cassian's plan went sideways, and in her experience, plans always did, this dossier might be the only thing standing between her and a body bag. She worked until nearly dawn, which is why, when the knock came at mid-morning and Jude Mercer walked into the library where she was indexing a row of leather-bound ledgers, she was tired enough that her guard slipped for a fraction of a second. "Busy?" he asked. "Always," she said. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her in silence. "You're very good," he said finally. "At alphabetizing?" she asked. "At pretending you're just alphabetizing," he replied. "At taking up space without drawing attention. At listening without looking like you're listening. Leonidas thinks you're brilliant." "And you?" Nyla asked, sliding a book into place. "I think you're lying to everyone," Jude said pleasantly. "Just not very often." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I ran your name," he said. "Nyla Rowan. Our database spat out a 98% chance you were a composite identity. No childhood, no school records, no medical history before a certain date, which means someone very powerful built you from scratch." Nyla forced herself to keep her hands steady. "Some people value privacy," she said. "This isn't privacy," Jude said. "This is erasure." He pulled a chair out, sat down opposite her, and folded his hands on the table like a patient interviewer. "Tell me," he said quietly, "does the name Helix mean anything to you?" Her heartbeat stuttered. He saw it. "There it is," Jude said softly. The flinch. Project Helix wasn't a name spoken out loud. It was burned into briefings, whispered one-on-one, referred to as the program everywhere else. It was Cassian's creation, a stable of deep-cover specialists trained to live inside corporations, banks, and governments until they were activated to bring them down from the inside. Ghosts in tailored clothing. "I don't know what you're talking about," Neela said. "Don't insult me," Jude said, his tone sharpening. "I don't work for Leonidas. I work for people who send men like me after men like him and after men like Cassian Ward." He let the name hang there. "Yes," he said, when she didn't react. "We know about Cassian. We've been following his work for a very long time. He likes to stand between monsters and claim he's cleaning up, when in reality, he's selling them different knives." "What do you want?" Nyla asked. "Dracos is about to make a sale," Jude said. "Not of a painting, of a weapon, a micro-EMP. You've been briefed on it, I assume?" She gave nothing away. "Cassian told you he needs proof," Jude went on. "Schematics, serial numbers, evidence he can pass up the chain to someone with a conscience, yes? That's the story he sells you. The noble saboteur, sacrificing a few bad men to protect millions." Nyla said nothing. Jude's gaze didn't waver. "The reality," he said. "Cassian is the buyer Leonidas is dealing with. Your boss isn't trying to stop the sale. He's trying to hijack it." A cold, sick feeling twisted in Nyla's stomach. "That's not possible," she said. "Isn't it?" Jude asked. "Who funded the shell companies Adrian Hale used to funnel cartel money? Who quietly kept the pipeline open long enough for you to gather enough rope to hang him? Who decides which criminals get exposed and which criminals get very profitable exits?" Nyla thought of the files she'd seen, the ones Cassian didn't talk about, the jobs he'd called too messy to assign, then taken himself. "You're lying," she said, because the alternative was something she wasn't ready to look at. Jude reached into his inside pocket and placed a small, matte black satellite phone on the table between them. "I don't have the luxury of lying to you," he said. "If I'm wrong, you walk away after this sale with your $5 million and your new name, and I look like a paranoid idiot to my superiors. If I'm right, Cassian gets an EMP device. Leonidas gets a wire he thinks is irreversible. And I start attending a lot of very boring funerals." He pushed the phone closer. "When Dracos opens that vault," Jude said, "I need you to be there. I need you to get the device and call that number. We will extract you and the EMP, and you get something Cassian will never give you. Which is, she asked. Immunity, Jude said. From us. From Helix. From the people who will come looking when this ship goes dark. And I'm meant to just trust you? Nyla asked. No, Jude said. You're meant to trust your training. He stood. The sale happens within 48 hours, he said quietly. The ship's course has changed. We're moving into international waters east of Malta. The vault will be sealed. The security grid tightened. This is your one window. He walked to the door, then paused. Dracos is a monster, Jude said. Cassian is a different breed of monster. You've spent 11 years being used by one ambitious man. Ask yourself if you really want to shackle your new life to another. Then he left her there, alone with the satellite phone and the sudden, crushing knowledge that the only person she'd ever allowed herself to trust had been writing her into his own exit strategy from the start. Nyla picked up the phone. It was heavier than it looked. Cassian had told her the EMP was a bargaining chip, a way to get leverage on men like Leonidas and the clients he served. He hadn't told her he intended to become one of them. She thought of Adrian, of the way he'd used her father's gift as collateral without telling her. Of the moment she'd opened the bank letter and realized that the person snoring next to her at night would happily set fire to everything that belonged to her if it meant he got a bigger table at the restaurant. Cassian wasn't so different, just more subtle. Helix had made her very good at reading ledgers. It had taken tonight to make her read the one that mattered most, the one tallying what she owed herself. She slid the satellite phone into her pocket beside her own burner. Then she went to find the engineering room. There was no way to get to C-Deck through official channels. Ingrid had made that clear, but no ship was built without maintenance access, without hidden panels and back corridors, in shafts that didn't appear on glossy guest brochures. She'd watched the crew. She'd watched the way they came and went from a particular steel door near the stern that required a key card and a thumbprint. She'd noted the shift change at 10, the habit of one young engineer, Lars, to leave his coffee and ID badge on a peg outside while he ducked into the crew mess. At 10:02, the corridor was empty. Lars's badge hung from its lanyard, swinging slightly in the residual breeze of his passing. Neela plucked it off the hook, pressed it to the reader. The light flicked from red to green. The door hissed open. Inside, the air was cooler, buzzing. A wall of monitors displayed engine readouts, fuel consumption, CCTV feeds, structural integrity overlays. In the corner, a schematic of the Eternum rotated slowly, deck by deck. Green zones, blue zones, red zones labeled with restricted clearances. C-Deck glowed in a darker shade, the center of it a block of dense shielding. The vault. Nyla moved quickly. She snapped photos of the screen, zooming in on the ventilation system, a main air trunk running down the spine, branches feeding into each sealed compartment, an access panel 2 levels up that, according to the overlay, connected directly to an inspection slot above the vault. She found the digital access log console for the door she just used, pulled a small device from her clutch, a palm-sized EMP jammer designed to fry a circuit in a 2-meter radius for less than a second, just enough to glitch. She pressed it to the panel, hit the trigger. The lights flickered. When they came back, the log for the last 10 minutes was blank. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than leaving her name in neon. She slipped out, replacing Lars's badge on the hook seconds before he returned, coffee in hand, oblivious. Back in her cabin, with the shower running yet again, she overlaid the photos on a mental map. One diversion topside, one climb through a shaft that would make a sane person claustrophobic. One vault with 2 men she could no longer pretend she didn't understand. Cassian, Leonidas. She was done delivering other people's weapons. Next time she walked out of a room with a case in her hand, it would be for herself. The sale, she suspected, would be tomorrow night. The Eternum had begun to move. She felt it in her bones. She turned off the shower and went to bed, knowing she wouldn't sleep and that the next 24 hours would decide whether she would ever sleep properly again. The Eternum's heartbeat changed the day of the sale. Even without looking at the screens, Nyla could feel it. The engine's vibrations shifted. The stabilizers worked harder. The air was colder in the corridors, the staff more brisk, voices lower. The cheerful background playlist that had hummed softly in public spaces since she'd boarded went quiet. Security thickened. Doors that had been casually unlocked now required codes. Crew appeared in pairs where before they'd moved alone. Cameras that had been content to sit in their smoked glass domes now tracked, more obviously. Lenses whirring. By late afternoon, the yacht had anchored in a stretch of international water that might as well have been a blank patch on any conventional map. Mr. Dracos requests that all non-essential personnel remain to guest areas tonight, Ingrid announced at lunch, her voice as neutral as ever. Decks C and below are restricted. Neela ate a salad she barely tasted, nodded like everyone else, and mentally marked which doors Ingrid said nothing about. She spent the afternoon in the library pretending to be engrossed in a catalog of Dutch Golden Age still lifes, while listening to the subtle thrum of helicopters coming and going, the distant thud of crates being moved below. At 7 p.m., the sail began. She knew not because anyone told her, but because the ship's alarms briefly went offline, then came back with an altered tone, a deeper, slower pulse that signaled lockdown mode. She changed into a simple black dress, mobility dressed up as elegance, flat shoes hidden beneath the hem. She pinned her hair up, slid the satellite phone into a pocket, tucked her jammer device into another. Then she went to the galley. The kitchen was a ballet of steel and steam, chefs moving around each other in a choreography finely tuned by countless dinners for men who thought their appetites were important. Tonight, they were plating dishes for an event 2 decks above. "I'm sorry, Ms. Rowan," the head chef said, when she slipped in under the pretext of complimenting the pastry. "We are very busy. Mr. Dracos requested—" "And I will be out of your way in 90 seconds, Nyla said, smiling brightly. "I just needed to speak to Ingrid about a humidity issue in the storage." "Oh." She stumbled deliberately against a rack. The tray of copper pots she clipped did the rest. They crashed down, one clipping the edge of the open electrical panel in the corner, with a sharp metallic smack. There was a spray of sparks, the smell of ozone, and then the circuit blew. The room plunged into darkness. Then emergency lights flicked on, bathing everything in red. "Shut that panel," someone shouted. "Kill that line. Reset the breaker." Chaos. Perfect, contained chaos. In the confusion, Nyla slipped out through the side door, meant for waitstaff, ducked down a service corridor, and headed for the access panel she'd memorized from the engineering schematics. No one noticed the quieter alarm that chirped briefly when she palmed the cover open. Inside, the ventilation shaft yawned. It was smaller than she'd hoped, larger than she'd feared. She swung herself up, boots braced on the narrow ledges, fingers finding purchase on rivets and seams. The metal was cold. She moved forward on elbows and knees, breath shallow, the sound of her own heartbeat loud in her ears. Dust collected on her palms. Now and then, a seam caught her dress, a sharp reminder that this was not designed for human passage. She passed one junction, then another, following the count she'd rehearsed in her head. 7 panels. Left. 3 panels. Down. At the final bend, she saw the faint grate of the inspection hatch, light bleeding through. Below, the vault. She wedged herself against the shaft wall and peered down. The vault room was a cube of steel and gleaming white surfaces. Racks lined the walls, holding cases stamped with serial numbers. At the center, on a pedestal that looked more like an altar than a storage solution, sat the device. It was smaller than the photo had suggested, a sleek black cylinder, matte, about the length of her forearm. It pulsed faintly with blue light along a seam near its center, a heartbeat in plastic and metal. 2 men flanked it. One was Leonidas, in a dark shirt and no tie, hands in his pockets, expression relaxed but eyes sharp. The other? Nella's breath caught. Cassian Ward. He looked exactly as he had in London, in Vienna, in the dozen other cities where he'd taken meetings in anonymous hotels and given her assignments that sounded like rescue missions. The same tailored suit, the same calm, assessing gaze, the same faint air of someone for whom everything was a transaction. He was supposed to be on another continent. Instead, he was here, in the vault beneath the Eternum, standing opposite the man she'd been told was his target. A third man stood to one side, skinny, gray, wearing a lab coat despite the setting. His hands hovered near the device with proprietary anxiety. "The field range is 40 kilometers, he was saying. Minimum. You test in a bay like this, Mr. Dracos, you risk knocking your own systems out. I recommend a land-based trial in a controlled environment. Desert, mountains, somewhere boring. We don't have time for boring, Leonidas said. The prospective buyers want a demonstration. The demonstration can wait, Cassian said mildly. They trust you. They trust me. The device is what we agreed. He moved closer to the pedestal, studying the cylinder. You're sure the core is stable? He asked. As stable as any device designed to fry infrastructure can be, the scientist said. Gentlemen, Leonidas said, we're all very busy. The funds have cleared. 50 million into the account you specified, Mr. Ward. You've inspected the merchandise. Unless someone has developed morals in the last 5 minutes, I'd like to conclude this transaction. He held out his hand. Cassian looked at it for a beat, then smiled and shook it. The merchandise is satisfactory, he said. The handshake sealed more than a deal. It sealed Nyla's understanding. Jude had been right. Cassian wasn't here as a saboteur. He was here as a client. And Nyla? She was the idiot carrying the wire that would quietly reroute the ownership trail away from whichever state Leonidas thought he was selling to, and straight into Cassian's private shadow empire. She closed her eyes briefly against the rush of betrayal. He hadn't just used her to bring down Adrian and his cartel clients. He'd used her to clear his own path, to eliminate competition, to build a database of leverage so dense he could someday buy governments. She looked back down. The scientist, Havel, she caught from a stray word, moved to a side console, tapping in commands. The vault door behind them hummed with locking rods, engaging mechanical comfort in a digital world. Once I leave this ship with the device, Cassian said, I want no further contact with your buyers. They are volatile. You wound me, Leonidas said, amused. They are the most stable criminals I know. They laughed. Nyla reached into her pocket, fingers closing around her jammer. Jude had given her one way out. Cassian had given her another. 5 million and a promise he could never keep. She chose neither. She chose herself. The ventilation shaft hummed with recirculated air. Just beyond her reach, a junction box fed power to the vault's lighting and locks, a cluster of cables wrapped in protective casing. She pried it open with a fingernail. Don't do it, a small survival instinct whispered. Wait, call Jude. Call Cassian. Walk away. She wrapped the stripped copper of the jammer around a live wire. She set the timer for 5 seconds. Every operation Helix had run through her had been about control, measured moves, clean signatures, no public mess. Tonight, if she did nothing, she died on someone else's schedule. She was done with that, too. She braced herself. 5. Below, Cassian reached for the briefcase Havel held out. 4. Leonidas's head turned slightly. Ingrid's voice crackled faintly over the intercom. Outer perimeter clear. 3. Neela took a breath, felt it fill her lungs, and held it. 2. Pleasure doing business, Cassian said. 1. The jammer detonated with a sharp, chewing crackle. The lights went instantly black. The hum of the climate system cut. The soft blue pulse of the device flickered. The vault door's magnetic lock slammed into emergency mode with a seismic clang of steel bars engaging. Someone swore in the dark. An alarm started up, warbling, then died mid-wail. Emergency lights sputtered to life a heartbeat later, bathing everything in hellish red. Shadows stretched and warped. What the hell was that? Leonidas snapped. Power surge, Havel stammered. Systems glitch. The locks have... The inspection grate gave way with a shriek. Neela dropped. She judged the distance carefully. It still felt like falling off a 2-story building. She hit the pedestal, rolled off, landed hard on her shoulder, pain flaring. Gunmetal flashed in the red light. Don't move, someone shouted. Muzzle flares stuttered. Bullets tore through canvas and glass along the walls. Shards rained down. Nyla rolled, tucked, let the chaos cover her. She wasn't aiming for the men. She was aiming for the briefcase. It lay on its side near the pedestal, halfway between Cassian and Leonidas. She lunged, fingers closing around the handle right as a boot came down where her hand had been a moment before. She twisted, yanking. The guard attached to the boot stumbled. She grabbed a shard of broken glass and slashed at the vulnerable spot between his ankle and his shoe. He howled, stumbling back. "She has it!" Cassian yelled. "Stop her!" So much for the mentor tone. Neela staggered to her feet, case clutched to her chest. The vault door loomed ahead, sealed. Havel's console glowed faintly with warnings. Locks engaged, security grid down. Fire suppression, Neela thought suddenly. Ships like this were built with fail-safes. Some automated, some manual. She sprinted for the bright red panel on the wall, slammed the heel of her hand into the plastic cover. It shattered. She yanked the lever beneath. Halon gas hissed from the ceiling. The room filled with thick, choking fog, colorless, cold, designed to suffocate flames by starving them of oxygen. "Masks!" Leonidas shouted. Neela hauled the briefcase, lungs burning, eyes streaming, toward the pressure wheel of the vault door. The emergency release was physical, not digital, the last resort if systems failed. She gripped the wheel and pulled. It moved a centimeter, then stopped. Behind her, gunfire stuttered, muffled by the gas. Someone coughed, cursed in Greek. Someone else went down hard, coughing. She pulled again. Her muscles screamed. Her vision narrowed. The wheel shifted another notch, then another. A seal somewhere broke with a hiss as pressure equalized. The door cracked open a fraction, enough to let a sliver of relatively clean air in. She squeezed through, dragging the case. The hallway beyond was empty. She collapsed against the cool metal, sucking in air that tasted like salvation. Behind her, voices shouted, distorted by the door and fog. The ship's main alarm finally found its voice, a long, wailing siren that vibrated the deck. She didn't look back. She ran. Up one flight, then another, moving past crew who stared, then reached for radio mics. She ducked into a service stairwell, took steps two at a time, the weight of the briefcase pulling at her shoulder. By the time she burst onto the aft deck, wind was howling. The sea had turned ugly, waves heaving against the hull. Lightning strobed in the clouds, outlining the yacht like a ghost. Figures waited near the rail. Jude Mercer, two men in dark tactical gear. All three guns were pointed at her. "Going somewhere," Jude shouted over the wind. "You're late," Nyla called back, chest heaving. "I'm right on time," he said. His hair was damp, his suit jacket gone, white shirt whipping in the wind. "Toss me the case." "You said extraction," she said. "And I meant it," Jude replied. "But plans changed. Headquarters got nervous. They don't like the optics of us walking away with a weapon of mass disruption and a witness who knows our faces." His gun didn't waver. "Give me the case, Nyla," he said, his voice softer now. "I'll put one clean round in your chest. You'll go over the side. No cuffs, no cage, no Cassian, no Dracos. It's the best I can offer." The door behind her banged open. Leonidas stumbled out, blood smeared along one side of his face. He had a compact submachine gun in his hands, the kind you only saw in places where laws were suggestions. Behind him, less steady but just as dangerous in his rage, limped Cassian. "Nobody leaves," Leonidas roared. "Not with my property." The triangle snapped into place. Jude and his men on one side, Leonidas and Cassian on the other, Nyla in the middle. Case clutched to her chest, the storm tearing at all of them. "Drop the weapon, Dracos!" Jude shouted. "This is bigger than you." "You're on my ship," Leonidas shouted back. "Out here, that makes it mine. That case is mine." He swung his gun toward Jude's men. They tightened their grips. Cassian's eyes were on Nyla. "Think," he shouted. "Whatever Jude's told you, he's using you too. Give me the device. We can still control this. Walk away. I can make all of this go away." "You mean you can hide it?" Nyla shouted back. "Like you hid Adrian. Like you hid me." Lightning ripped across the sky. The rain intensified, stinging her face. "Enough," she thought. "You all want it?" she yelled. She snapped the case latches open. "Don't you dare!" Jude shouted. Inside, nestled in foam, the EMP core throbbed with that eerie blue glow. Brighter now, like it sensed proximity to open air. Neela grabbed it. It was heavier than it looked. A dense, humming weight that made the small hairs on her arms prickle. She lifted it, arms shaking slightly, and stepped backward until the rail clipped the backs of her legs. "Shoot me!" she screamed over the storm. "And this goes with me." 3 sets of eyes tracked her. You activate that thing, Jude said, and you take down every plane, every ship within 40 kilometers. You crash this boat into the nearest thing that floats. You kill half the people on it who have no idea what any of us have done. I know, Nyla said. You drop it, Cassian shouted, desperation fraying his composure, and it drops to the trench. It will be retrievable, eventually, by someone who doesn't know what they're doing. You cannot control it then. Give it to me. We can at least choose who. That's the problem, Nyla cut him off. You always think you should choose. She thought of the ledger she'd uploaded from Adrian's firm, the one Ingrid was probably already using to peel his accounts like an onion. She thought of 11 years in a glass prison, pretending not to notice how often her husband's phone was face down. She thought of the ledger she'd begun on Leonidas, and the knowledge that Cassian's ledger on her was thicker than any of them. I'm done being an asset, she said. She stepped up onto the rail. Stop, Jude shouted. Bullets cracked the air. She jumped. The fall was a lifetime compressed into 3 seconds. Wind tore the scream from her throat. The core hummed in her arms like a live animal. Then the sea hit her. It was like slamming into a wall. The shock of the cold punched the air from her lungs, every nerve ending screaming. She went under, deeper than she'd prepared for, the weight of the core dragging her down. For a moment she thought, this is it. Then training cut in. Let go. She unclamped her fingers. The device tumbled away, its blue light dimming as the dark swallowed it. Nyla kicked. Her chest burned. Her ears roared. Her muscles felt slow, syrup thick. She broke the surface with a gasp that was half sob, the heavy swell tossing her like a toy. Above the Eternum was a black silhouette against a white explosion. Something, bullet, spark, carelessness, had found its way to the fuel stores near the helipad. A ball of fire rolled up from the stern, blotting out the sky for a second. The shock waves slapped the water, shoving Nyla under again. When she surfaced, sputtering, coughing, the yacht was burning. Flames licked along the deck, devouring teak and glass. Smoke poured into the storm clouds. Little figures ran along the rail, their shouts lost in the roar. She turned away. The waves carried her further into the dark. She reached for the locket at her throat, fingers numb. The chain had cut into her skin during the fall, but the clasp held. She yanked it open. Inside, where someone might expect a photo or a pill, was a tiny black button. She pressed it. A beacon, dormant for years, began to broadcast. 10 minutes later, over the howl of the wind, she heard the hum of an engine. A low gray shape materialized out of the rain. A rigid hull inflatable boat, sleek, silent, moving quickly but not recklessly. Hands reached down, strong and sure, and grabbed her under the arms. She collapsed onto the deck, coughing up seawater, shivering so hard her teeth rattled. The world narrowed to the sound of the engine and the slap of waves. You look terrible, Ms. Rowan, a familiar voice said. She rolled onto her back. Ingrid Weiss stood over her, hair plastered to her skull by rain, hands steady on the wheel. Surprised? Ingrid asked. A little, Nyla croaked. You pressed the beacon, Ingrid said. I programmed the locket myself. Cassian didn't know that part. Whose side are you on? Nyla managed. Ingrid considered this. Mine, she said. Occasionally yours. She tossed a thermal blanket over Neela, then nodded toward the horizon, where the burning yacht's glow was fading. 50 million diverted from Dracos accounts an hour ago, Ingrid said. Your ledger made it efficient. By the time anyone looks through the wreckage, the paper trail will be as broken as the hull. And Cassian? Neela asked. If he got off, he did it on his own, Ingrid said. No beacons for him. Nyla swallowed. And the device, Ingrid added. You had it. Had, Nyla corrected, voice hoarse. Past tense. She turned her head toward the dark water. It's gone, she said. Dropped into a hole no one sane will send divers into. Let the deep keep it. Ingrid studied her for a moment. Good, she said simply. They rode in silence for a while, the boat cutting away from the wreck, the storm starting to abate. Where does this go? Nyla asked at last. For me. Officially? Ingrid said. Nyla Rowan died in an accident aboard a private yacht that suffered a catastrophic engine failure. A short, sad tribute will run in a London Society magazine. Adrian Hale will receive a life insurance payout tied to a policy he didn't know you'd change the beneficiary on. Nyla blinked. You changed. You didn't have time, Ingrid said. I did. The beneficiary is a trust. You're the trustee, under a new name. She handed Nyla a waterproof pouch. Inside were documents, the edges visible through the plastic, a passport, bank cards, a folded sheet of paper with numbers. I'm not Cassian, Ingrid said. He thinks in leverage. I think in exits. Why? Nyla asked. You don't even like me. I don't dislike you, Ingrid said. I dislike people who think we exist to orbit them. Cassian, Dracos, Adrian Hale, men who treat women like call options. She wrinkled her nose slightly, as if at a bad smell. Besides, or she added, you're good at what you do. It would be wasteful to let you drown. Nyla was too tired to argue. She looked back toward the dwindling glow of the Eternum. The news will say accident, Ingrid went on. Some outlets will whisper about sabotage or intelligence operations. Nothing will be proven. They never are. And you? Nyla asked. I go back to doing what I do best, Ingrid said, managing chaos, from slightly farther inland. She nodded at the pouch. You have options now. Vineyard, bookshop, something quieter than this. Nyla looked down at her shaking hands. For the first time in a very long time, there was nothing in them. No ledger, no weapon, no script someone else had handed her. Just a future she hadn't planned yet. She tightened the blanket around herself and leaned her head back against the boat's side, watching the smoke thin into the sky. She'd walked onto that yacht as a wife, a spy, an asset wrapped in someone else's name. She was leaving as none of those things. She closed her eyes and let the engine's vibration lull her toward the first real sleep she'd had in years. It took the sea 2 days to fully swallow the Eternum's bones. By then, the story was everywhere. Private mega yacht destroyed in mysterious explosion off Maltese coast. Billionaire recluse possibly among the missing. Authorities investigating cause. Footage of the blaze ran on loops. Shaky phone videos from distant tankers. Grainy satellite images of a bright orange smear on black water. News anchors used words like tragedy and unfathomable loss. Commentators speculated about sabotage, insurance fraud, enemies. None of them said micro-EMP prototype. None of them said Helix. A few whispered illegal arms sales before their producers cut to commercials. Nyla watched one such broadcast from a cramped hotel room in Athens 3 days after she left the boat, the cheap television perched on a wobbling dresser. The volume was low. The air smelled of cleaning fluid and stale smoke. Her hair was a different color now, darker, cut blunt at her shoulders. Her skin already held a little more sun. The passport in her bag said, Mara Delcourt, born in Brussels, dual national, self-employed art consultant. The trust Ingrid had mentioned was real. So were the 7 figures attached to it. Not as much as Cassian had promised, perhaps. Not as much as Leonidas hoarded. But enough. Enough to not have to answer to anyone for a very long time. She turned the TV off. Adrian called once. The number flashed on one of the disposable phones she'd kept from Helix days. A relic she'd considered smashing and hadn't quite let herself destroy. She watched it ring until it went to voicemail. Later, she listened. His voice was strained, threaded with something that might have been genuine fear for the first time since she'd known him. Nyla, I got a call from some maritime lawyer. They said there was an accident. Your name was on the manifest. If this is some kind of sick joke, it isn't funny. Call me back, please. He broke off, swallowed, then recovered some of his old bite. You can't just disappear like this. You can't. She deleted the message before he finished. Somewhere in London, a claim handler at an insurance company was processing a payout on a policy attached to her death. Somewhere in Zurich, a trust account Ingrid had quietly opened months before was accepting that payout. Adrian would receive nothing. He'd realize it too late, after he'd already told everyone his wife was gone and sobbed crocodile tears into the right cameras. He'd survive. Men like him always did. He just wouldn't do it with her father's money in his pocket. In a cafe in Lisbon a month later, Nyla read an article buried halfway down a financial news site. SEC probing possible money laundering at Hale & Co. There was a photo of Adrian walking briskly into a glass-fronted building, jaw clenched, ignoring reporters' questions. A small smile ghosted across her face. Not her work, not directly, just gravity catching up with him. She closed the tab. It was tempting, for a while, to simply drift. She tried it. She rented a small apartment with peeling paint and a balcony big enough for a table and 2 chairs in a neighborhood where no one knew her name and everyone minded their own business. She drank coffee in the mornings and wine at night. She walked along the waterfront, watched the ships, felt her heartbeat slowly fall into step with the tide. She lasted 6 weeks. Then she woke one night with the old familiar urgency in her chest. It wasn't anxiety. It was unused capacity. She'd been built by Cassian and people like him to dismantle complex structures, to find the rot in systems people assumed were unassailable. Helix had taught her that. Adrian had taught her something else, that structures didn't have to be criminal syndicates to be rotten. Sometimes they were marriages. Sometimes they were companies quietly bleeding their non-working spouses dry. She thought of the box of incorporation papers she'd kept for sentiment, the one that had allowed Elena Miller, not her, another woman on another channel, but close enough in spirit, to reclaim a life her husband had tried to erase. She thought of all the women who never had that box. The next morning she opened her laptop. There were still networks she could touch without exposing herself. Channels Helix used to find his targets. Channels Jude's shadowy side of the world used to trace illicit flows. She didn't want to be Helix. She didn't want to be Jude. She wanted to be something else. Ingrid had moved quickly. By the time Neela called the number embedded in the trust documents, the other woman was already 3 steps ahead. "A foundation," Ingrid said when they met in a quiet cafe in Vienna 6 months later. "You provide the forensic eye. I provide the logistics." "Helping who?" Nyla asked. "The invisible ones," Ingrid said. "Spouses whose signatures have been forged, partners whose names have accidentally dropped off in corporation papers. The ones who are told they're crazy when they ask where the money went." Nyla thought about Elena again, about Judge Breyer's gavel in that story, about the quiet, devastating line. "You are the one getting nothing." "Funding it with Draco's money is poetic," Nyla said. "I thought so," Ingrid replied. "They called it the Delcourt Initiative. Officially, it was a consultancy that provided financial clarity during complex separations. In practice, it was a scalpel aimed at the underbellies of men who thought moving assets offshore was the same as burying them. Neela never met the clients in person. She didn't have to. Ingrid did the front-facing work. Neela did the tracing, the dismantling, the maps. She marked patterns. Shell companies in tolerated jurisdictions, consultants with suspiciously generous, non-salaried packages, board resolutions that happened conveniently close to marriage breakdowns. She was very, very good at it. Cassian never called. Whether he'd survived the eternum or gone down with it, she didn't know. She hoped in a small and ungenerous part of herself that he'd lived long enough to feel the fear Leonidas had felt in that vault, in that gas. Jude called once. The encrypted line lit up on a burner she kept for that purpose only. "Relax," he said when she answered. "This is personal curiosity, not professional misconduct." "If you're tracking this number, you're bad at your job," she said. "Fair," he replied. "I'm calling up an old debt. I told you if you got the device to me, I'd extract you. You threw it into a trench instead. Bold choice." "Regrets?" she asked. "None," Jude said. "The more layers I strip off that program of yours, the less I like it. The fewer toys people like Cassian have, the better I sleep." He paused. "Where'd you disappear to?" he asked. "Nowhere," she said. "Everywhere." "Are you safe?" he asked, and there was something almost human in the question. "For now," she said. "Try not to ruin that." "I'll do my best," Jude said. "Stay off boats." She hung up before the conversation could drift into something like sympathy. Years later, in a small coastal town where tourists came for wine and sunsets, a woman sat at a cafe table by the sea, fingers wrapped around a cup. Her hair was longer again, threaded with a few early silver strands she'd decided not to dye. Her eyes were the same cool gray. The cheap silver locket at her throat caught the light when she turned her head. From time to time, a mega yacht would ghost across the horizon, white, gleaming, obscene. She would watch it, expression unreadable. If you'd look closely, you might have seen the way she noted the helipads, the hull lines, the distance between its position and the nearest shipping lanes. Then she would look back at the woman across from her, a client, nervous, clutching a folder of papers she barely understood. "They say I'm crazy," the woman would say, "that I'm imagining things, that he'd never risk his own company to hurt me." Nyla, Mara, here, would smile slightly, the same smile she'd given Victor Malin before she took his ring. "Let's look at the numbers," she'd say. "Numbers don't lie. People do." Her legend had begun in a penthouse, with a suitcase and no tears. It had flashed briefly across a burning deck in the Mediterranean. It lived now in bank ledgers and court transcripts, where her name never appeared, but her work did. Because the most dangerous woman in the room, she had learned, wasn't the one shouting. It was the one quietly filing, checking, tracing. The one who knew exactly when to walk away and what to take with her when she did. And now, if you've made it this far into her story, let me throw the question to you. If you were the one holding that EMP core on the edge of a storm-torn deck, would you have sold it for billions and tried to control the fallout? Or dropped it into the deep like Nyla and walked away from all of it? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If stories like this, about betrayal, power, and the quiet kind of revenge, hit something in you, make sure you tap that like button. It really does help the channel reach more people who need to hear they're not crazy and they're not alone. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next wild ride. We've got another one coming about a perfect CEO who finds out the intern he's been ignoring is actually the auditor assigned to dismantle his empire. You're not going to want to miss that. Until then, stay sharp, stay safe, and remember, you're allowed to walk away with your head up and your hands full of everything that was always yours.